Coman69 here with another Topic of the Week video. This week, Christmas month continues with another Halo topic, this time all about rewriting the 343 games. This week's topic was submitted by a Tumblr anon, and their topic is: how would you rewrite Halo 4 and possibly Halo 5? That is, if you don't scrap 5 altogether. Okay, so I actually have a lot of ideas of rewriting it, and I actually have pretty much a whole story for Halo 4 and a lot of ideas for Halos 5 and 6 written down. I would definitely have a full trilogy, and so that way that you can end it with a 7th main Halo game. ODST is kind of a side game. So you have the Halo trilogy, Reach, and then 4, 5, and 6. And 7 is Bungie's number. I feel like that's a nice way to end it. And there's a lot of story ideas that I ended up coming up with that I felt there's a lot you can really do with this. One of the things I do is that I bring in a number of expanded universe elements, and before people get worried, I actually have a specific goal when I was writing this that you don't need to do any research whatsoever in order to understand what's going on. My goal and the angle that I was going at is that I wanted to be able to write this, or I was trying to write this so that even if you have never read the books, you don't even know about the expanded universe, you wouldn't be lost. Because when you incorporate these elements, you have to write for two different types of people. You have the hardcore fans who read the expanded universe, like, me, and then you have the fans who have only ever played the games. And you need to make sure that neither of them feel lost. Unfortunately, that's what 343 did by trying to come up with a bunch of stuff and putting it in the games without actually explaining it. Now, I bring in stuff like things like Blue Team, Chief Mendez, Colonel Ackerson, the Forerunner Crystal from First Strike. Things like this will be brought up, and in times important to the story. But I want the game itself to give you explanations instead of saying, well, you gotta read the books. That being said, one thing I would do with these new games is include an in-game codex, like Mass Effect, where you have all the information that you're going to need for basically all the expanded materials, all the games, all set up in a very organized way, so that if someone does want to do research, or if they are interested, or if someone, say, hasn't read the books in a while and needs a refresher, they have all that information right in the game that they can go to at any time, even before they've started the campaign. It's all open, so you can just go and check that out if you want more information. But a little feature that I would have, I'm going to talk a little bit about game mechanics because I do have a lot of ideas for that, but for the most part this is mostly just the story. But one game mechanic that I would put in, a feature that you could turn on and off, is that anytime something from the expanded materials is referenced in the games and they're being talked about, a little notification will show up and you can click a button and it would pause the game and then give you information relevant to that. And it would show, and it would give you saying, okay, this is related to the Fall of Reach, or Halo First Strike, or Ghosts of Onyx, or whatever. It'll give you a lot more context and more details than what's given in the games, but it's not required, because I want this to just be for people who really are interested in knowing more about the expanded materials. Because when you bring this stuff in, I want to make sure that there's no way that anyone is lost, and if anyone is a little confused, they have all the resources they need in the game to look anything up. Okay, so that was a lot, because there's a lot of stuff I wanted to get into before I actually started talking about the story. But now on to the story for Halo 4. This will be mostly Halo 4, but I'll talk a little bit about Halos 5 and 6, after I'm done with this. So for Halo 4, the main menu would just be, you would see the Forward Unto Dawn, just kind of floating in space, and then you'd have the main menu. When you're starting the campaign, the text would all fade, and the Halo 4 title would fade, and then the camera moves, and you start seeing the Forward Unto Dawn moving towards Requiem. And that's it, instantly moving right into the opening cinematic. Because I really want to go with a lot of smooth transitions, because that was just, I always love those. Those are so exciting. So the camera moves into the Forward Unto Dawn, and you see Cortana there, and she's seeing that they're about to crash into this planet. She's like, crap. And then it cuts to Chief's perspective, and you hear a, "Chief, wake up, Chief, I need you." And then she bursts out, and he's just like, "Cortana, what's going on?" She's like, "We're crashing. I need you to get us out of here." So Chief, takes her chip out and puts her in his helmet, and he starts making his way out. And this whole level would be a tutorial. There's no Covenant invading. There's no one's boarding the ship, because I'm not going to copy the opening for Combat Evolved, but this whole level is escaping from the Forward Unto Dawn before it crashes into Requiem. And it's mostly used as a tutorial. You'll get Cortana doing an abridged version of the look up, look down, look left, look right, and then you'll have and then you'll learn shooting, melee, grenades, etc. All that stuff as you're breaking through parts of the Fort Unto Dawn to escape. And once you get outside of it, then Chief is just like, well, can't stay here, so he ends up jumping off because Cortana and Chief are, well, they're both crazy. So you would control Chief floating down and avoiding the debris that's falling around. But then, right as he's getting closer to the ground, trying to have as soft of a landing as he can, a piece of the Fort Unto Dawn comes flying down and hits Chief, and he crashes into the ground, and then boom, cut to black. That's the end of the first mission. It's fairly short. There's a lot of missions in this game, and a lot of them range from being short to actually decent length. But that opening one is mostly a prologue. But then you cut to the next mission, and this one's interesting because it wakes up and you're getting a timestamp for 2532. And you'll get the date. It'll be like one of the Nylon books where you have, or Halo Reach, where you have specific dates and times, and it makes it clear that this is in the past. Then you see Chief with other Spartans. What I'm doing in this is that there are going to be several flashback missions with Blue Team, because these serve multiple purposes. For one, for fans of Blue Team, they'll be like, yes, Blue Team in the games! But it's also going to serve as an introduction for people who have never, who've never read the books and don't know who they are. So you're going to see Blue Team, Kelly, Chief, Fred, and Linda in all these missions. There'll sometimes be other Spartans that, are in there so that they get to be a little bit familiar with other Spartans. But it's mostly those four so that once they become more relevant to the actual story, the audience, regardless of whether they've read the books or not, already have built up attachment to these characters. So the transition being is that Chief actually has part of a downed phantom on him, and Kelly and Fred and George is there too, because I wanted to add another familiar Spartan from Halo Reach, because George was a Spartan too, and this would be before he was assigned to Noble Team. So that, there's a little bit of familiarity there. He's Blue 5 in that mission. So they lift up the piece of this phantom off of Chief, and then they do their mission. They're, taking out this Covenant installation. I don't have all the details for these flashback missions laid out, but it's mainly I wanted to set these up because they're new missions that most of this is completely new that people haven't seen, so that even people who have already read all the books, they still get new content for Blue Team. And I didn't want to just retread missions from the books. Because even while I do like some of those missions, it'd just be a little bit repetitive. And also the fact that one thing I would like to do is actually have all of the main books animated like a full mini-series that covers all the events of the books, specifically for Fall of Reach, First Strike, and Ghosts of Onyx, and have those available to watch. So that's just a little side thing, a little bit not relevant to the game directly, but something that I would do if I was creatively in charge of Halo. So they go through and they do this mission, and then they go back, and then you get a little conversations between Chief and the other Spartans. So you actually get to see him interact with them, and you get more about his character, and you get to see a bit more of his book character shining through in this than you do in the games, because in the games you don't really get as much of Chief, and I wanted to have more of Chief's character from the books, so that fans who love the books get to see this, and I know a lot of people really wanted to see this, and you get people who aren't familiar with the books actually get to see this and see, oh wow, there is more character to Chief, and also a bit of a showing of Chief's humanity and how he cares about the people around him, and particularly his the people who he's close to, like his Spartans. Now the mission would end, or the whole mission would end with Dr. Halsey coming in. She's just like, Chief, wake up, and then he's what? Chief, wake up, and then it cuts to Cortana saying, Chief, wake up, and he's just like, oh crap. So that transition automatically puts the idea of Cortana and Halsey being connected in some ways, because it's Jen Taylor's voice for both of them. So that people who aren't familiar, and they will learn in this game that Cortana is based off of Dr. Halsey, but I'm already setting up these ideas in their heads. Now, Chief pushes the piece off of him. He gets out, and it's importantly because he's got this scar across his chest piece, and this is going to be relevant mostly for Halo 5 story. I'll get into that later after I'm done talking about Halo 4. So after this, we get a mission where Chief and Cortana are basically like, okay, we need to get our bearings. Like, where are we? And Cortana's like, I don't know. I scanned some of the planet, but I really couldn't do much with the messed up equipment on the Forward Unto Dawn. So they're like, okay, so we're going to need to set up some sort of beacon. We need to try to contact the UNSC ASAP. So they're like, alright. So Chief starts talking to Cortana, and they are trying to figure out what's going on. And Chief notices that something's off about Cortana, and this is when we get the introduction of her rampancy. When Chief is talking to Cortana, he's just like, how long have you been in service? And she says, 7 years. Because it's been 3 years since the end of Halo 3, so it's 2556. And Cortana went into service 2549, so it's been 7 years. And as explained, at the end of 7 years, a smart AI generally enters rampancy and is decommissioned. So this stuff is explained, and Chief is just like, okay, then I guess we have to stop it. And Cortana's like, you don't just stop rampancy. And he's like, well, we're going to find a way. Because Chief's like, all right, that's my priority right now. I'm going to stop this. And Cortana, who had become actually rather depressed, being alone for 3 years, and now she's just like, oh God, I missed you. And so that becomes their goal. Make a beacon, contact the UNSC, but also figure out a way to stop this rampancy. Because they realize that if the UNSC showed up, then they would probably just decommission Cortana regardless of her service because, well, that's protocol. So Chief's like, okay, we're going to do this, and then we're going to find a way. So they go out and they start, sort of figuring things out. They need to see if there's anything they can do. And then they run into Covenant forces, and Chief's like, oh, the Covenant. And they start firing on him, and he's like, oh, what's going on? I thought we were good with the Covenant. And Cortana's like, don't ask me, I'm out of the loop too. So then they do an investigation. They find out, they basically find they steal equipment from their Covenant, their Covenant tech to make a beacon. And then Cortana and Chief basically single out this jackal, and they interrogate him, and they find out that this group isn't part of the main Covenant. They're a splinter group that's called the Sword of the Prophets, that's led by a Sangeli, or an elite, if you're not familiar with those terms, named Jul 'Mdama. Jul 'Mdama is the primary antagonist of this game. So then they're like, oh crap. And then they find out that there's another army with him too that, is millions strong, and they're like, oh crap. Well, looks like we found ourselves in a bit of a pickle. So then they kind of try to figure out a little things more. And then when they actually see the Jul 'Mdama with the character I call the Prime Warden. Now, if that sounds like the Warden Eternal, it's because I actually did base him off the Warden Eternal, but he's not a sucky character. He has the same outline. He still uses a sword, but he's an alien, and I'll go into a little bit about his backstory here. You will find this out eventually, but I'll just tell it right there so you're familiar with it as I'm talking. He has the same sort of a silhouette as the Warden Eternal, but he's this bug alien guy. He's still 10 feet tall. He has this huge 6 foot long sword. He's all black. His armor's all black. His sword's black. His skin is black. He's got this whole black thing going on. Him and his species from his planet, all the species around his planet, are very dark colors. And their armor is dark, their equipment is dark. And very much I wanted to contrast this with the more colorful colors of the Covenant. Because you see Covenant, species mixed in with these new guys. And I don't have all those details down yet, but that's the general idea I was going with. Now, the Prime Warden's planet was conquered by the Covenant hundreds of years ago. And the Covenant went to this planet, and the prophets are like, sign the writ of union. And they're like, no. And they're like, I guess we're going to conquer you. And they're like, bring it on. And they ended up conquering this planet, and they refused to sign the writ of union. So the prophets just ended up subjugating that whole planet and turning it into a gigantic factory. So they put factories all over the planet and just used that planet species as slave labor. And they were building just Covenant ships, ghosts, banshees, phantoms, frigates, all this stuff, and we're just using them as labor. So after the Covenant's civil war, and the pretty much dissolution of the Covenant in post-war, and then the rebirth of the new Covenant underneath the Arbiter. They realized, the Prime Warden realized, hey, no one's stopping us, and we're sitting here with thousands and thousands of ships and equipments and vehicles that the Covenant had, so they're like, I guess we get to do whatever we want. Now, Jul 'Mdama, who's fanatical, and even after being betrayed by the prophets, he feels like it was the mistake of the Sengeli, so he has to like redeem himself. So he started the Sword of the Prophets to honor the fallen prophets, to continue on the great journey, because he's kind of a nut. But when he met up with the Prime Warden, because he realized that they needed each other, the Prime Warden needed someone like Jul 'Mdama to be a military leader, to control this, these millions of, people that he had, and to strategize, because the Prime Warden doesn't have any, he's strong and he's powerful, but he doesn't have any, relevant military experience. But Jul 'Mdama also needed the huge army that the Prime Warden and all the ships that the Prime Warden could provide. So they worked together, and considering the Prime Warden actually is very much a Blood Knight, so he very much gets along with Jul 'Mdama in that sense, because they both are, warriors. And the funny thing is that the Prime Warden doesn't actually really care about what's going on. He doesn't care if everyone dies. He actually is concerned with having a good fight. He's always been the strongest on his planet. And now he gets to, and once he hears about the Spartans, he's just like, I want to fight these Spartans, these demons you talk about. And he says, so his whole goal is to fight a good fight. It's funny, his motivations are very simple, and he's working with Jul 'Mdama so that he can fight these Spartans and fight these humans, because he wants to have a good fight. In his view, it's, I want to have a good fight, and if I die against someone I feel is worthy, then that's a good death. He's very much, a battle-focused guy, and doesn't really care about what's going on. He lets Jul 'Mdama do whatever he wants. But, so those are the main villains here, and those are be villains in the trilogy. So they end up Chief and Cortana end up putting together this beacon. Cortana is like, okay, I found out from this Sword of the Prophets that there's some sort of like Forerunner database. That this is a Forerunner planet. And so they have this information, and they're like, okay, let's check it out and see if there's anything that we can do about, the rampancy. So starting the next mission, they go into this database, and Chief being a reclaimer, it turns on, it makes it easier for him to interact with this. And Cortana goes in, and she basically searches his database, and she's like, oh wow, this is an artificial planet. This is made by the Forerunners. But she's like, I can't quite tell what it was for. So alright, so Chief's like, is there anything useful? And she's like, yes, there is something that I found that should be able to help. Basically, when the Forerunners would make AIs, like for example a monitor, they would make a bunch of these AI bases, so that it's all the stuff they would need for an AI. Very efficient, so they, whenever they need an AI, they would basically just grab one of these bases and they would program the AI for whatever they need. So Cortana says, alright, what if we can get one of those, and I can see if I can use that to sort of program myself into this using Forerunner technology. She's already familiar with Forerunner technology, and she has so much information from the Halo that she's like, okay, I might be able to actually do something with this. It's a long shot, but it's the only one they have. So then Chief's like, can you get one of these? She says, yeah, it seems that of all the planets that had these that wasn't destroyed in the Forerunner Flood War, she did find one that was relatively close. It was Reach. Now I acknowledge that, people are probably going to say, isn't it a little convenient that it's Reach? Yeah, it is, and I acknowledge the narrative convenience. But considering that we know that the Forerunners had a lot of important stuff on Reach anyway, like the Forerunner Crystal, it's not too much of a reach, pardon the pun, that they would also have something like these AI constructs on the planet. So then Chief's like, alright, so let's go. So they end up getting a ship and that's slipspace capable from the Covenant, and then they take it off and take a trip to Reach. Now, even with a Covenant slipspace drive, it's still a bit of a trip. So Cortana's just like, Chief, you relax. Let me handle flying this. So Chief's like, alright. Then Chief remembers another mission. It's one of those, another blue team mission. This one is actually based on the Halo Legends short, The Package. But this one would actually be canon compliant. It's Chief with Blue Team, and they have to rescue Halsey from a Covenant fleet. So they have to sneak into these Covenant ships trying to find Dr. Halsey. And that's the whole story. They find Dr. Halsey, they get back, and it's just it would actually be a decent mission, but I like that little story from Halo Legends. My only issue with that is that it didn't really fit with canon. It broke canon too many parts. So I would actually sort of recreate that, but in a way that makes sense within the context of the overall canon. And it's a fun little mission to do with Blue Team. So then after this, you go to the next mission where Chief lands on Reach. And this is where, in this whole part, there's a lot of action that was going on, particularly in that last mission that Chief was remembering. This is sort of dialing things back a little bit. And Chief gets on a ghost that was on the ship they were on. And he takes it out, and he's just on Reach. And Reach is glassed. And Cortana's, and him talk about this. And there's a lot of interesting little Easter eggs you can find, conversations you can get with Cortana. And there would probably be some achievements tied to getting all of these, or finding certain ones. There's one that was kind of important that I was, that I definitely want to include, but I wasn't sure if I wanted to make this required or optional, and I was leaning towards being optional, that you can find Noble Six's helmet as seen at the end of Halo Reach. And Cortana would talk to him about this, and this is where you would actually get some tie-in to Halo Reach. There would also be some explanations that would explain what seemed to be inconsistencies. I won't go into all of that because this would actually be significant, and the reason I wanted to consider this optional would be because there would actually be a lot of talking, a lot of lore, and I feel like a lot of players would probably get bored of that. But people who are into the lore, and people who may have had some issues with Halo Reach, there would be some corrections for, and some explanations for what happened. Like, Cortana, or explanations that exist, like, the fact that the Cortana in the game is actually a fragment of Cortana. Cortana ends up talking to Chief about this stuff. And you find out, things about, the Pillar of Autumn picking up, Noble Six, or picking up Cortana from Noble Six, and then Chief is just like, I thought the Pillar of Autumn was already in space leaving. And then it's mentioned that the Forerunner crystal that was from First Strike actually warped the Pillar of Autumn back in time, and it actually managed to be on Reach at the time, because it gets a little complicated, and this is why I wanted to have this be maybe optional. Because I don't want to make the average player sit through that. So that's only for people who are really into the lore. But it's something that I wanted to do, and Chief would actually get the chip from Noble Six, and he would actually get to see some of the stuff that he did. But he leaves the helmet there because we know from the epilogue of Halo Reach that the helmet is there even years later. And that was just an acknowledgement of things from Halo Reach. And there would be other things mentioning New Alexandria, the Spartan training areas. They would go there as they're basically going on in a fairly peaceful place, fairly peaceful landscape of more or less a wasteland of glassed areas. But then Cortana senses, used the sensors and found that there was a section of Reach that, there were certain spots that weren't glassed. And then Chief is just like, oh, well, the only reason the Covenant wouldn't be glassing it is if there was something important there. They go there and they find, openings to Forerunner ruins. So they're like, okay, of course. They wouldn't want to destroy everything there, so it looks like they had tried to break in but couldn't. But Chief being a reclaimer and Cortana knowing Forerunner technology, they're able to get in, and then they end up fighting through some Sentinels and stuff, and they end up getting one of these AI bases, and Cortana's like, cool, sweet. Looks like this one's in good shape. Let's head back. So as they go out, all of a sudden you find out that sort of the Prophet forces had followed them because they detected them using the slip space, and they have to fight their way back, and then they end up going back to Requiem. So once they get back to Requiem, then Cortana says, all right, so there's this facility here on the planet that should be able to use the AI, construct. So you need to get me to there, and I'll try to use it. So they go there, and they there's a lot of gameplay of fighting through the sort of the Prophet forces. Chief has a conflict with Jul Madama, and a little bit with the Prime Warden, but mostly Jul Madama trying to stop him because he's a demon. So Chief gets to this facility, he puts in Cortana. They use the AI base, and they're like, okay. And Cortana's like, okay, let me do this. Unfortunately, these alarms start blaring, and Cortana's like, "Oh crap! The security just turned on." And then she gets swarmed with sentinels, and then it turns out that this facility is on a ship. So this ship starts launching and ends up going into the the atmosphere of Requiem, and Chief ends up it's trying to get Chief out because it's detecting unauthorized usage, and Cortana's like, crap, we need authorization codes to use this, and he's like, oh crap. So it ends up getting and knocking him out, and he's sort of like hanging on for dear life, and Cortana says, Chief, you have to get out of here. It's going to try to kill you. And Chief's like, okay, I'll get the authorization codes and I'll come back. And he's like, I'm not going to leave you. I'm going to make sure that we solve this problem because I made a promise. So then Chief ends up swan diving off of the ship and ends up crashing back into Requiem. And then, of course, it fades to black again. The next mission is actually titled 051, and anyone who knows the books knows that's Kurt's number. This is another blue team mission, but with Kurt. It's one of the few missions that they were able to run before Kurt, vanished. So, it's very simply an introduction to Kurt for the average audience. And it also brings up insurrectionists. So you get a little bit of information about the insurrectionists and a little bit of history before the Covenant showed up. It would be in the, in the time, I think it was 2531 is the year that Kurt joined the team. I think so. I don't remember the exact. I'll have to go check the Halo timeline. I have to go check Ghosts of Onyx again. But yeah, it'd be like a 2531 mission where Kurt is on the team before him getting launched headlong into space. So that's basically what that mission is. I don't really have too much details about it, but that serves as some interesting introductions for some expanded materials like Kurt and the Insurrectionists for people who have only played the games. The next mission is actually where we are introduced to the Infinity. So during the time when Chief was unconscious, the Infinity had gotten the beacon and they landed on Requiem. So Chief wakes up and he's alright. I'll try to find my way back to the beacon. And as he's fighting through forces, he runs into the Arbiter. The Arbiter, goes and he's like, "It's been too long, brother." And then he's talking to the Chief, and then he's like, "Wow, Arbiter, where'd you come?" He's like, "I came on one of your ships." The Arbiter says, "Well, you had a beacon out, and we had answered it, and I was contacted as soon as they got it." So they're like, "So I wanted to come to see if you had truly survived." So Chief's like, "All right, well, it's good to see a familiar face." And then Johnson shows up, and Chief's reaction is going to be the player's reaction of, "Didn't you die?" It's like, "Didn't you die in my arms?"
We had a bonding moment. I cradled you in my arms.
And and Johnson's like, "Nope." And there is an explanation for his survival, which Johnson does tell the Chief. He usually gives the, that's classified thing. But there is an actual legitimate explanation for why he survived. Johnson didn't actually die from Guilty Spark's shot, but he was severely injured. Now, as we learn in First Strike, because Johnson was infected by the Flood, but due to a disease, specifically his Orion Project augmentations, if you're not familiar with that, Johnson drops a few hints that he went through augmentations as well. But this stuff is like years ago. This is the predecessor to the Spartan 2 project, if you're not familiar with this. You get more information about this. And Johnson was infected with the Flood, but not assimilated because something was weird with his biology that it didn't mesh. So Johnson actually gained a regenerative ability, and so that injury he ended up recovering from, but it took a little while for him to actually heal. Now, the Ark actually had a security system to get, if there was any sort of danger, it would get personnel out of there, it would teleport them away. But since it was, there was a lot of danger in the Flood, it was, busy dealing with the Flood, it also had a lot of, the whole thing was falling apart, the Halo was firing prematurely, and it prioritized one, the most injured person, Sergeant Johnson, over Chief, the other reclaimer there. And, if Chief was teleported, it would have just totally ruined the final Warthog run. But Johnson was teleported out, and he was sent through the portal back to Earth, And this idea is actually an idea I got from I was reading up on Halo Wars, that John Forge was supposed to survive the ending of Halo Wars instead of dying in the explosion, because some Forerunner system was going to teleport him away. That ultimately ended up not being used. But I thought, okay, let's use that to bring Sergeant Johnson back. And I specifically brought him back because you can tell that the games really need Johnson. Without him, you can tell there's a real hole in the new games. They're trying to fill it. They tried to fill it with new characters. They tried to bring in Buck in, but it just didn't work. And I always felt that Sergeant Johnson and Miranda's deaths were always dumb. Even back when I wasn't really into Halo, I just thought it was dumb to kill them off, because it felt they were like, oh, well, crap, well, we're at the end of the trilogy and we haven't killed enough people off, so let's just kill off two beloved characters. So, yeah, I do bring in Sergeant Johnson because, well, I feel like the games need him. They need his sense of humor. They need his character to lighten things up at times, and to just be that sort of goofball, almost at times parody character, saying goofy lines in the middle of battle. And it's going to really revitalize, a lot of things going in, because you have a lot of somber stuff from the first half of the game. Because, yeah, that's about the halfway point of the game. So at this point, you have Johnson now to interact with Chief, and you'd have some nice interactions with Chief as they make their way to the Infinity. Chief talks with Johnson and the Arbiter about what's going on. You get information about the Sword of the Prophets from the Arbiter. A little bit more information about Jul Madama, and this is where you get that backstory I told you about. Some information about the Prime Warden, and more information about what's been going on with the galaxy in the last several years. So, when they get to the Infinity, this is where Chief meets Captain Del Rio, Lasky, Palmer, even June. June from Halo Reach. He is still in charge of the Spartan 4s. He's overall their commander. And I admit, I know a lot of people didn't like June. I didn't like June, but I decided to take the route of writing him better, because he wasn't very interesting in Halo Reach. So I did decide to write him in. He's actually got Survivor's Guild, because he's the only member of Noble Team that survived, and a lot of the other Spartan 3s that he knew are dead. So he wanted to he basically took the role of Kirk in training the Spartan 4s, and Sergeant Johnson sort of took the role of Chief Mendez, basically overseeing a lot of they were already trained, but he's just there to keep them in line, because Sergeant, even with them being augmented, Sergeant Johnson, he still commands the respect and authority. So, a little details about the characters. Palmer's actually got a bit of a hero worship of Chief. She's still kind of cocky. She thinks the Spartan 4s are all that. And she thinks that, they're the next generation. But she's still overall more likable, because she very much admires the Chief. Lasky is pretty much the same, only he's a little bit younger. He and Palmer are the same age, and they basically trained together. So they've known each other for, well over a decade. And Del Rio is radically different. He's very nice. Almost too nice. Significantly different from his canon counterpart. He's very much welcoming to Chief and is willing to help him out in anything that he needs. So then Chief is like, we need to get Cortana, and then when Johnson finds out, Johnson's just like, what did I tell you about Cortana? Don't let her go. And Chief's like, hey, it's kind of out of my hands. She's stuck in a Forerunner ship right now that literally tried to eject me. So he's like, all right, let's get Cortana back. But they're like, first, Chief, take a break. It's like, you've been fighting nonstop all this time. Take a break, Chief. So Johnson and him have a nice talk, and then Chief decides to rest a bit. Then we get another flashback mission with Blue Team. And I don't really have much to say about this mission, other than you do a lot of flying in it, and that's really the base idea I had for it. I wanted to have some different gameplay elements focused on for each mission. But importantly, Chief and Kelly spend a lot of time together, and this is where you actually get to see a lot more of his interactions with Kelly, so that you really start seeing throughout these missions that Kelly is very important to him, so that when he talks about Kelly, you understand how important she is to him, that she is his best friend. He's known her, he's been on a team with her since they were 6. So yeah, they're really close with each other. So yeah, that's that mission. And then the next one is when they're like, okay, so we need to figure out where to get these authorization codes. So they said, all right, the Infinity did a scan of the planet, and they're like, okay, it looks like there's this one part that sort of the prophets are trying to get into, but can't. There's a lot of, heavy activity there, but it looks like none of them can get in. So they're like, okay, so they drop them off, and they fight their way through into this, this place, this entrance or Forerunner, installation, and then a Guardian shows up, and this is an idea I actually took that was cut from Halo 3. It's this huge Guardian comes up and they have to fight it, and Chief ends up fighting it and beating it. Because Chief went down there with some Spartan 4s, Marines, and Johnson. So they're all working together to try to get through this. So then they get out, and then they end up going into this, and then they find a monitor. It's Exuberant Witness. 151 Exuberant Witness, and she's actually sort of in hibernation mode. And she's got all this like moss growing on her and stuff. And then they wake her up, and she's just like, "Greetings, Reclaimers! I am 151 Exuberant Witness." And she's like, and then they're like, "Hey, can you help us out?" And she's like, "Sure. Let me check with the composer." And they're like, "Who's the composer?" She's like, "The Forerunner who runs this place." And they're like, "The Forerunners are gone." She's like, "Ridiculous! I just went to sleep. They should still be around." And then. You get the very sad moment where she actually checks the computers and finds out that the Forerunners are extinct. And for her, she was put to sleep before the things really got bad for the Forerunners. And then she wakes up having realized that the Forerunners had lost the Shield Worlds. Now, I don't go into the details of it. All it says is that they were lost to the Flood and the Gravemind. I don't really go into the whole Medicate bias situation, because that would be a little too deep going in. So the important stuff is that they lost the Shield Worlds, and the plan didn't go through. And basically, her entire purpose was, she said, to monitor things going on with the Shield Worlds. And she's like, she was supposed to assist the composer in this, and she's just like, the composer's dead, and left a message to Exuberant Witness, and she is just like, there's nothing for her to do. Her entire purpose was to, safeguard the Forerunners through the Shield Worlds, but that's all gone, and she has nothing. And then she actually wants to go with Chief, and Chief's like, "Okay, can you help with these authorization codes?" And she's like, "Of course I have that." Says, "I can help you." So she wants to now protect the Reclaimers, because she knows, she was told that, if she has the chance to do so by the composer. So then she ends up going with Chief, and then they get out, and then they end up having a fight with the Prime Warden, and the Prime Warden kills all the Spartan 4s except for Palmer. And Palmer, checks out. She just witnesses him just slaughter them, killing Marines too, and she's just like, she's straight up shell-shocked. And if it wasn't for Chief, she would have been dead too. And Chief ends up fighting the Prime Warden and manages to, get her and the Marines, and some of the Marines and Johnson out of there. And then they get her back to the Infinity, and she's just out of it. She just watched people that she had trained with, people that she's known for a while actually, just get mercilessly slaughtered. And it was too much. She never actually saw that stuff during the Covenant War. And when you see Lasky is very, very basically trying to make sure she's okay. And Chief can tell that, they've had a very close relationship. And, but Chief kind of leaves Palmer to it, because she's like, okay, she needs a little bit of space, and he's not going to do anything. So Chief reports to Del Rio in June, and he basically talks about what happens, introduces them to Exuberant Witness, and Exuberant Witness is going to help them out with Cortana. Now, we have I actually didn't talk about Roland in this. Roland is very different from how he appears in the games. He has a very sort of naval appearance, kind of looks like that. He's got a very, very, simple, fairly simple design, and something you end up finding out about, I'll just tell it right now, is that he's actually based on Captain Keyes. in that and they had flash cloned his brain and made an AI out of it, and he went into service post-war and was put on the Infinity to basically assist them in their mission of basically doing whatever the UNSC needs it to be. So they get together and they're like, okay, we need to figure out a plan. And Exuberant Witness is like, well, the ship that you're looking for is actually completely cloaked itself, and she says, I can help you. If you can get me to it, I can help you teleport there. And she's like, okay, that's a plan. But then some ships from the Sword of the Prophets fly in and start attacking the Infinity. So then the Infinity has to fight back, but Del Rio looks confused. He doesn't look like he knows what he's doing. So Lasky jumps up and he starts taking command, starts taking evasive maneuvers, starts firing back. And a little detail about the Infinity is that it's a part of a pair of ships. One built for the UNSC and one built for the Covenant. It was made using some Covenant technology, and the other ship, called the Never-Ending Alliance, was made using some human technology. And these ships were made to be a sign of the new relationship, the new alliance between the humans and the Covenant species. So the Infinity has some big plasma cannons too with it, and some Covenant shielding. So it does hold its own, but Chief and the Arbiter are like, okay, let's go out and take out some of these ships. So the Arbiter goes to a ship and Chief goes to a ship, and then they basically start taking down these ships while the Infinity is fighting back. And then they end up stopping these ships. And they're like, okay, then the ones that remained were damaged. They get back to the Infinity, and then they're just kind of like, Del Rio, what's up? Del Rio's just like, I'm not supposed to be captain. And this is where you actually find out that Del Rio was only put in charge of the Infinity for publicity. Yes, this is going to be rather infuriating. The brass, specifically people working in Oni, wanted a lot of good publicity post-war. Del Rio had made a name for himself, pulling off a maneuver that destroyed a couple Covenant cruisers. Only he admits that that was a total accident, and it was sheer happenstance that what he did caused them to be destroyed, because he was trying to flee. So he was promoted to captain, and then, he was sort of a war hero, but he was kind of too afraid to admit to people that he didn't actually do it, because, well, what's he going to do? How are people going to react? They're going to end up hating him. So he didn't tell anyone. And he was put in charge of the Infinity, because the Infinity was never actually meant to go into significant combat. They weren't really expecting that, and the Sword of the Prophets hadn't really had much in the way of great conflicts yet. So they really didn't want the Infinity, because the Infinity was meant to be very much this shining beacon. It had the Spartan 4s on it, and the Spartan 4s were the new soldiers of a new generation, and it's kind of infuriating. But Del Rio sort of tells Lasky, all right, you're in charge, because you're obviously better capable than me. And, Chief does it so that he can, at the very least, have his have some honor, so that he can essentially just sort of back out and let Lasky take what really is shown to be rightfully his position as a captain. And then going into the next mission, another ship comes in, the UNSC Forged by Fire, and it comes in and it destroys the last of the Prophet ships, and comes in and it contacts the Infinity, and they're like, oh yeah, it's Captain Keyes. And then their chief is like, what? And then Miranda shows up talking to Lasky, and then Chief's just like, Miranda says, what's going on here? And she's like, Chief, I heard there was a beacon, but I didn't expect you to be here. And she's like, I'll explain later, just wait. So she catches up with Lasky. And then Chief goes over to the Forged by Fire, and he talks to her. So Chief has sort of a personal talk with Miranda, and she explains, what happened with her, that after she was shot by Truth, and she had pretty much, died, that, Johnson took her and, left, and put her in a cryopod as soon as he could. It's basically the same thing that Chief does with Linda at the end of The Fall of Reach. So that later, after the fact, Miranda was clinically dead for, a while, but she was in cryo, and afterwards Johnson wanted to make sure that, she survived, because he was good friends with Captain Keyes. And he wasn't going to let, Jacob Keyes' daughter die. He says, he wasn't going to let that happen. So he wanted that to happen, and so afterwards they eventually, they did the same thing that Halsey does with Linda in First Strike. They flash-cloned organs, they went into surgery, and, they basically, revived her so that, and she was, considered, a war hero during the times and ended up getting promoted to captain. Now, she was hoping to get onto the Infinity, but obviously since they were more focused with someone like Del Rio, and considering that she was kind of dead for a little while, they let her, they put Del Rio in charge. Now, one thing that you'll notice, and this isn't going to be really mentioned much, but Miranda does have Halsey's journal. Now, how did she get this? There is an explanation. Basically, Oni had it, but then Johnson pulled strings with Dare, and so Dare basically got it and gave it to Miranda for, if you actually know that Halsey is Miranda's mother, that he felt like, next of kin, really. You guys don't deserve to have, to learn the stuff about Dr. Halsey. So she has it, and so yeah, Miranda has read through, her journal, and she now knows a lot of stuff. And you're going to see a lot more sort of a solemn, attitude she has with Chief, because she knows his backstory now. And she knows that he actually went through a ton of crap. But it's not going to go into that. This isn't going to take too long to go through, because it's mostly a catch-up and more of an explanation for how she survived. Because again, I felt like Miranda's death was really dumb. And I wanted to bring her back in a way that has already been established within, the books. There's precedent for what happened. And because I really like Miranda as a character, and having her at least involved in what's going on, even if she's not, directly involved in everything, I actually do feel like that definitely enhances the story. So Miranda does say, "All right, Chief, I'll help you find this ship and help out Cortana." She's like, "I certainly am not going to simply decommission her, because of rampancy." Says, "I want to see if we can help her first. I'm not." Says, "I care about this. I just particularly because she knows more about Cortana, and that she hasn't seen her mother in years, and Cortana is pretty much the last bit of her mother that she could possibly find." So she does. This is something that she feels is personal to her as well. So they go in there, and you'll have some missions with Exuberant Witness, trying to help them find this ship, and they go in there and they end up fighting. So they're trying to set up things so they can find this ship, but they're actually interrupted by a call from Colonel Ackerson. So this is, but someone's probably going to say, but didn't Colonel Ackerson die in some comics? And yeah, considering those aren't the books, I'm not going to, even then, those are so obscure, it took me a long time to find this. I'd already pretty much come up with my overall outline for Halos 4, 5, and 6 when I found that out. I'm like, not interested in that story. But you find out that Colonel Ackerson is in charge of the Spartan 4s. So anyone who's read the books already automatically knows, okay, something's fishy with this. And and those who are being introduced to Colonel Ackerson for the first time get to see what a colossal douchebag he is. And you can see this seething hatred of Chief showing up, because he's just like, you. And then you can see the way he down talks to Palmer, criticizing her for basically just trying to do her job, criticizing everyone, and even, thinking that June should have done a better job, and he's just a jerk. But, then you have then after that call, they're just like, why did Colonel Ackerson know what's going on here? None of us had contacted him. And then Roland says, I'd contacted him. They're just like, what? Why? He says, I was actually programmed by Oni to report to Colonel Ackerson and Admiral Paragonsky, in case, anything happened. And they're just like, why? He says, and he admits, though, that he was basically put there to spy on them. And they're like, crap. But he did admit that while he was following his program, he has come to realize that he doesn't really want to, and even though he was programmed to report to Ackerson, he's even grown to dislike him. So he decides to keep things under wraps, and that he says that he can keep a secret. And so then we get Roland having that moment. Then they're like, okay, so we're pretty much like trying to wait until we can catch something to figure out where this ship is. And then And I was going to have another blue team mission. I think it'd be the last blue team mission of the game, where you have. I was actually considering having this be about Jericho 7, which was in the books, and just see that there'd be more information on it. I'd have to do a little bit more research to see if I can flesh this out a bit. I'll probably have to reread the books again just to be sure. But ultimately, I'd want this to have a conversation between Chief and the Arbiter about it. The Battle of Jericho 7, where you find out that that whole planet was glassed, and that Chief has watched it be glassed. And ultimately, it's just another blue team mission, so that you get to be that the players are more familiar with blue team. So after this, we end up in basically the final act of the game. Roland, had been monitoring the communications of the Sword of the Prophets, and found out that it seems that Jul 'Mdama has found the Forerunner ship. So they're like, okay, let's do this. So they go down there, and then you have a Sword of the Prophets fleet come in, and it's like, oh crap. So the Infinity and the Forged by Fire engage, while Chief and the Exuberant Witness are down on the ground trying to get to the ship. So they're going through, they're fighting, and they're teleporting around to different parts of the planet. And then the Never-Ending Alliance comes in, which you find out is actually the Arbiter's ship. He made that his personal ship. He goes up on that, and then some other ships of the New Covenant end up with this huge battle over Requiem of the Forged by Fire, the Infinity, the Never-Ending Alliance, and several other Covenant ships fighting the Sword of the Prophet ships. So there's this huge battle going on while Chief is trying to get to Cortana. So they fight their way through, and the Prime Warden kind of realizes that, not really into this right now. And he's like, Jul, he says, you can take this, I'm gonna go. Because, he's just like, deuces. He's like, I'm sure that this Spartan will fight another day, because he was disappointed with the Spartan 4s that he just slaughtered them. But he's just like, yeah, I'll wait and fight the Master Chief on another day. So Jul ends up, fighting the Master Chief, and then Chief ends up sort of escaping and getting to the ship. So while he's on the ship, he fights through the security. He has Exuberant Witness with him. And then he gets to Cortana again in that room, that facility that they were in, and he has Exuberant Witness give the codes that they need, turns off the security, and then Cortana's like, okay, cool. So then they're like, all right, well, I guess we need to start the procedure. And then so they try to do it, and Cortana tries to basically copy herself into the Forerunner code and integrate herself with that Forerunner code. So, and there's this, and it's actually kind of creepy, because Cortana would be like, it looked like her hologram is being like ripped apart, and it's just like, it's weird, this simulating a pain for her of literally her code being ripped apart and put into this Forerunner, AI base. So, and then Jul shows up and has a fight with Chief. So, and they end up fighting in this room, and Chief has to also defend, this unit that Cortana is in, so that the procedure can still happen. So he ends up fighting Jul, and ends up, eventually at the end of the fight, he ends up kicking him out of the ship, and he ends up falling down, and he lands on one of their phantoms, and then Jul's just like, ah. But then at the end, you see Cortana is finishing up the procedure, and then it all just shuts down. And Chief is just like, did it happen? And Exuberant Witness is just like, I don't know. And Chief thinks that, it failed, and all that for nothing. All that time, all that struggle, and he didn't save Cortana. But then it lights up again, and Cortana shows up, and she's just like, yeah, you get rid of me that easily. And then he's like, when her hologram comes up, it's completely different, this weird alien-looking thing, and she changes it, and she's just like, oh, looks like that was what the base appearance is going to be. Then she changes back to her typical look, and she's just like, I think it looked pretty good for the first Forerunner human AI hybrid. And then, so then she's pretty sure that, she does her diagnostics on herself, and it seems that she's good, so she makes herself a new chip, and that would fit into Chief's helmet, and that can actually hold her now. So Chief puts her in, and then it ejects the old chip that she had, and Chief decides to keep it for sentimental reasons, because that was her old chip. And then they end up, then Exuberant Witness is just like, looks like the ship is crashing because of the damage, from the battle that, and its age and the fact that Cortana fried half the ship with the procedure. And then they're crashing, so Chief and Cortana jump out, and it's just like in the beginning of the game where they're diving through, and Cortana says, okay, no, go to this spot. So you go over to that spot, and they get teleported into what Cortana explains is the control room for Requiem. And she says that this whole station was meant to have an eye on all of the shield worlds. So like what, Exuberant Witness had said that, she was meant to monitor the shield worlds. So they actually had, computers that would watch over the shield worlds, and they could look at these shield worlds. So Cortana's like, let me check this out. Because, she's like, okay, this is really interesting. So she checks the computers, and she's like, Chief, there is a shield world that has occupants in it. And he's like, living occupants? And they're like, yeah. And it's listing them as reclaimers. And he's like, humans. So, like, and she's like, well, it's weird because several of them have the same sort of biological, readings that you do. Similar height, muscle density, weird, augmentations. And he's just like, Spartans. They're more Spartans. And she's just like, yeah. So they're like, they're able to send a message there. And she's like, we can send a message. And so Chief tells her, a message to send. He says, tell them to be ready. So Chief gets teleported out back onto the Infinity after the battle, it's won, and they ended up destroying the Sword of the Prophets. And Cortana goes into the Infinity, and she meets Roland, and she's just like, hey. And Roland's just all being stiff. And then Chief, tells them to, Cortana to, put in those coordinates that they had, and he's like, we need to head for this, these coordinates. And then Lasky's like, why? And she's like, and all Chief says is, I need to pick up some friends. And then that's where Halo 4 would end. And it's like, yeah, they're going to go to Onyx. And that's the, to get Blue Team. And that's where Halo 4 ends. So by the end of it, you should know, alright, you know who Blue Team is. You had several missions with them. You have Chief talking about them. And now at the end, Cortana has been saved. We don't have to deal with the rampancy. I feel like killing off Cortana was a dumb move by 343, and I'm sure some people would complain that, Chief does save her, but she's Cortana. Why would you get rid of Cortana? And I tried to make this as, relevant to the, the lore as possible when it comes to keeping Cortana from dying. Because I didn't want to get all pretentious and go, oh yeah, Chief has to feel more pain by losing more people. Like, no. It's like, honestly, I felt bad enough just writing the fact that he thought that she died in the procedure. But, that's... So, yeah, then you now have, Chief on the Infinity with Exuberant Witness and Cortana, and, they're gonna go to Onyx. Now, at the end of the game, if you get the legendary ending would be... It shows the place where, at the end of Ghosts of Onyx, the character, Halsey, Mendez, the Spartan 3s, and Blue Team were in that weird, sort of grassy plains, and it shows a monitor flying, and it goes up to Kelly, and it says, "Greetings, Reclaimers." And this monitor is persistent, 041 persistent progress. He's actually supposed to He's supposed to take care of. He was supposed to take care of the Forerunners in the Shield world, but of course he didn't. And just like with Exuberant Witness, he was sort of like resting, and he was in hibernation, waiting for the Forerunners to show up. But they never did. But then the Reclaimers showed up, and they found his his little facility that he's in, and he's like, all right, so he's taking care of them. And he's like, it says, "Greetings, Reclaimers. There was a message from the monitoring station." And they're like, what? And then he's like, and they're like, what's the message? And it says, "Be ready from 117." And then Kelly's like, "Chief." And then it ends. No, if you had panned the camera over to the left while Kelly's having this conversation with Persistent Progress, you'd see Linda and Fred. Fred is balancing this huge knife, and Linda's balancing this sniping rifle while they're just doing it off screen while Kelly's having this conversation. Because, you gotta have some sort of cheeky reference, and so you would know that that's, Fred and that's Linda, and this is Kelly, and I would actually also have a book written that sort of like leads up to that, so you find out what's been going on with them, which is mostly for people who read the books, because when they actually meet up in the next game, you find out, basically Chief finds out the important stuff. And it's kind of a great thing that Chief wasn't there for Ghosts of Onyx, so that, some of the events can be explained to him. Now, overall, I don't have a direct story for Halo 5. I have an overall story, but I'll go into a bit of that, but there's still a similar setup with Halo 5, or at least the way it was advertised. There is the hunt between Locke and Chief. So the game would open up and you would see Renee and Kirk, who were Spartan 2s that washed out, and they would talk about how, there's something, reports that Master Chief had done something. And Admiral Paragonski assigns Locke to track down the Master Chief and, bring him in. So you get this talk between Kirk and Renee that they don't buy this, but, Locke's going to form a team to go after the Chief. It's going to be Fireteam Osiris. Then you follow Chief on the Infinity and the Forged by Fire going to Onyx, and they fight the Sword of the Prophets that had found, they fight them, and then they end up going down there, and Chief goes through with Cortana and finds eventually finds the room that leads to the Shield World, and Cortana ends up activating it. And they, the first person that comes out is Kelly, and then John and Kelly have sort of a reunion together. And then the rest of them come out, and then Chief sees Mendez there and Halsey, and he's just like, oh, I didn't realize you were there too. Because they didn't know exactly who was in the Shield World. And then you see the Spartan 3s come out, and, the rest of the Blue Team, and Chief has his reunion. And, and a detail that I actually forgot to mention with Halo 4 is that Chief had posthumously been promoted to Master Chief Petty Officer of the Navy. So he actually has more authority than he did before. And so Chief, he's just like, well, I guess I'll take it. But then Fred would remark upon, his rank now. And, he meets up with Chief Mendez, and you would have found out about Chief Mendez from Halo 4. So, and then they get Dr. Halsey, and then, so Chief's like, okay, he gets them out of there, and then all of them escape, so you fight with Blue Team again, you have the Spartan 3s there, so you'd have the, the surviving members that made it there, along with the ones that were in sort of the Forerunner, stasis. So they all fight together, getting out there, and importantly, you get a reunion between Miranda and Halsey. And this is where you find out that, officially that Miranda is Halsey's daughter. And then a lot of people, the characters are going to be like, what? And even the Spartans are like, what? And then there's Sergeant Johnson smugly smoking a cigar going, I knew. And he's like, Jacob Keyes was my good friend. You think I didn't know this? But, yeah, so then, I don't have the exact story, but ultimately Fireteam Osiris, which would include Locke, Olympia Vale, and Vale's got her own story. To sum up her backstory, because I did focus on her because she ends up becoming a significant character. She was a Marine who spent a lot of her own free time studying the Covenant languages, specifically Sangeli, their languages and what they knew of their culture, because she was always so interested in it, and she found it helpful when fighting against them. But she was there in the battle for New Mombasa, and during the whole slip space jump that was in atmosphere slip space jump, the Pelican she was in ended up crashing, and she got paralyzed from the waist down. Well, Oni saw this, and they were like, okay, we can have you work here as an analyst, trying to work for them, because you have your knowledge of Sangeli. So she took that, and even though she was wheelchair bound and felt, rather down about it. So, but when she did that for a while, and then post-war, she was elected to be the human Sangeli ambassador. So she went to Sangelios, and she spent time there, and actually became good friends with the Arbiter. But then when the Spartan 4 program came up, she was given the chance to take enhancements, and also would get cybernetic enhancements to her legs that would allow her to walk. So she took it immediately, and she's just like, I understand, Arbiter, you're done a lot of good here, but I want to have this chance. I want to be able to walk again. And he's just like, I understand. So then she ends up becoming a Spartan 4, working for Oni, a lot, just like what Locke did. Then they would have on their team Rosinda who's actually a Spartan 3 who was on Noble team, but she was an alternate, and she wasn't there in the Fall of Reach. So, and then this is her, because she was cut from the game, so they just she still exists, but she wasn't in the game. And then there would be another Spartan 4, and then, so their team, as Fire's team Osiris, go after Master Chief, and they try to track him down. And then you would play as Locke in these scenarios, trying to find Master Chief. When they go to Singelios to talk to the Arbiter, and they're like, okay, we believe Master Chief destroyed an entire city, killing millions of people. And then he's like, we're trying to find him. And then the Arbiter is just like, no. Says, I don't believe that at all. Says, I fought with Chief not too long ago. And he's like, we need your help. And he's like, no. Now, so they end up bringing in actually Alpha 9 from ODST. So you get Buck, you get the Rookie, you get the rest of the team, and even Dare makes an appearance because she works for Oni, and it was through her that they got the team involved because they came with her high recommendations. So Buck is involved, but Buck's not happy about it. He's just like, I'm not welcome, Master Chief, and they're just like, we need to, and he's like, fine. But the Rookie ends up helping out. And overall, there would be some actual fights between them both. The funniest thing is that Blue Team would utterly stomp Fire Team Osiris. The only one who would put up a fight is Rosinda because she's a Spartan 3. But even then, at that point, it's like 4-on-1, and Locke thinks he's got Chief. And it's just like they get smacked around like it's nothing because the Spartan 4s aren't nearly as enhanced as the Spartan 2s. So they're just like, well, crap. And even when Alpha 9 comes in, Alpha 9 are just like, we don't want to fight Spartans. But ultimately, it would be discovered by Johnson and Miranda that, and even the Arbiter gets involved in that Chief didn't do this. You remember what I said earlier about that scar across Chief's chest? Across his armor? Well, yeah, it's real. They realized that this video evidence that they had of Chief being there didn't have this, and they know that Chief got that right after he landed, as he crashed into Requiem, and there's absolutely no records of them leaving. They checked the cryopod, and they're like, it was frozen for 3 years, and they're like, okay, something's fishy here. And then they end up finding out, okay, yeah, this was falsified. Like, all right, now we just need to figure out who was trying to frame the Chief. And then stuff happens. I don't really have the full narrative set up, but it would be revealed that Locke was behind this. So you're playing as Locke. Locke is the main villain. Because you find out that Locke was a Spartan 3 candidate. He was part of Alpha Company. But he wasn't chosen for augmentations, and instead was taken into Oni to work for, Paragonsky and Colonel Ackerson. But because he grew up with this utter hatred of the Covenant because they destroyed his home world, and he lost all of his family. But when he went in, he started seeing humans do cruel things to the Covenant, and even when the Covenant were pinned down, they would just wipe them all out. And in his mind is just, he had this black and white view of humanity pure and good, and then Covenant evil. But he started seeing the Covenant being attacked, and his mind broke because he had so dedicated himself to this black and white view that he was just like, there's no way a human could be bad, but they are bad. So he ended up growing into this nihilistic view that everyone deserves to die. So what he wanted to do was frame Chief for doing this because Chief had been missing, and and basically send people in a wild goose chase to chase down the Chief, so that he could actually figure out a way to activate the Halos. He just wants to just wipe out everyone. He ended up teaming up with Jewel Madama because he knows Jewel Madama wants to use it for the Great Journey. So he promised to help, feeding them information, which helped the prophets out a lot. So, and then he ultimately is just going to try to get the Halos, activate them, and wipe out any sentient life he can, because he feels like, no, the Covenant don't deserve life, humanity doesn't deserve life, and he's just going to wipe out everything. And Locke is very much based on the that Hunt the Truth trailer, the one where he finds an injured chief, the one where he's spouting poetry. He's very much like that. He's very poetic, but he's also got this weird, creepy, nihilistic view, and honestly, he's creepy. So after that's revealed, because he ends up killing the other Spartan 4 that was working on their mission with them, because he started realizing that, wait, there's a human that betrayed us to work with the Covenant, and then energy soared right through him, and then after that, because the rookie actually notices a lot of these inconsistencies in Locke's story, and ultimately figures out that he had had done this himself, and then ultimately Locke ends up, of course, then Locke reveals that he had betrayed them, and he leaves with the Sword of the Prophets and Jewel Madama, and then at that point, when it comes to Osiris missions, you take over as Olympia Vale, and then they bring in a couple other people to bring in another Spartan 3. Another Spartan 4. At that point, you basically it's trying to stop. It's just trying to stop Locke, and there would be a second in command for Jewel Madama who shows up in this game, and he's not nearly as he's still fanatical, but he's not as fanatical, and he feels like Jewel Madama's kind of losing it. And Jewel Madama ends up dying at the end of the game in the final battle, and I don't really have as much context for that. Because there's a lot of stuff to juggle with this game, but ultimately he would end up taking over and still trying to continue on, but still kind of feeling like maybe this isn't the right thing to do. And ultimately, by the end of Halo 6, he would have eventually realized that he was wrong and defected to back to the Covenant under the Arbiter. And ultimately, there's a lot of stuff that they end up fighting at the end, the big climax at the end of Halo 6, where of course you would end it with the Warthog run. But there would also be some interesting stuff in Halo 6, like Spartan Grey Team shows up, and the point that they hadn't actually been seen in years is actually brought up, because they're just like, where the hell have you been? We haven't seen you in like 6 years. They're like, well, we've been doing our thing, fighting against the Sword of the Prophets. And they still have the old Spartan armor, but yeah, Jai, I forgot all the names of them, but yeah, so they're showing up, and they're fun, but you would get them in the story as well. But I don't really have everything nailed down. There's just a lot of base ideas. Oh no, another moment that I really like is at the end of the game, after everything's crashed, like Miranda and Johnson, they're sitting there covered in all sorts of crap and dirt, and they're just like, Johnson pulls out a cigar, and she pulls out her dad's pipe, and and smokes it in celebratory, and she's just like, that she doesn't smoke, but it's just kind of honoring her father. I had a lot of ideas on going, like I didn't have a lot of ideas going into it, but I started coming up with a lot of this stuff as I sort of got the ball rolling on the story. It started off with just rewriting Halo 4, but then there were so many ideas I had going past that, and I'm like, okay, I can do a whole trilogy. And yeah, so I know this video is probably long enough anyway, but that's what I would do for a new trilogy. So I want to know what you guys think of that. Do you like the ideas? Because I know a lot of people generally always want to ask about how I would rewrite things or my story ideas. So I do want to know what you guys think. I mean, if there are any ideas you have, or there are things that you would have done differently, please comment below and talk about those, because I'm very interested to hear what people think. Because a lot of people, because I know there are people who are really interested in Halo that are disappointed with the new game. So I want to know what you think of these ideas. If you want to submit a topic, you can either comment below if you're on YouTube, or if you're on Tumblr, simply send me an ask and do topic : then whatever topic you want me to talk about. Just make sure to follow the rules I'll be posting down below. If you want to watch last week's topic video, you can check that out here. If you want to watch next week's topic video, you can check that out here when I get that done. And thank you for watching.